Good afternoon, everyone. It's Thursday, the 25th of January. My name is Jeshil, and I'm joined by Raga Anuday today to discuss a very interesting topic. Uh, we'd be talking about Indonesia's ambitions to become the EV manufacturing hub of Southeast Asia. So, just to give some context on the topic, the Indonesian government has been focusing on producing EV batteries since 2019. And this has been particularly due to the high global demand for electric vehicles. So, with the global EV market expected to reach around $950 billion by 2030, Indonesia is very much trying to make a name for itself in the EV sector. So, to start things off, Uday, could you just give us a brief rundown of why Indonesia is focusing its resources with the sector in particular?
Right. So I mean, this is basically on the back of the country's sizable resources. Um, Indonesia has a lot of nickel, copper, cobalt, and bauxite reserves, which are essential for manufacturing EV batteries. And Indonesia also has, a large population and an economy that has been trying to be more resilient and especially after COVID. So policymakers, especially President Jokowi, has really focused on making Indonesia an EV manufacturing hub in Southeast Asia. He has set several initiatives for this measure, including the EV acceleration program from 2019. Under this, they banned the export of unprocessed nickel in 2020 because Indonesia wants more downstreaming, and maybe Raga can comment on, the downstreaming practices in Indonesia later. Right now, there's an EV battery manufacturing plant opening up in West Java in April this year. Once operational, it's supposed to be the largest EV battery production facility in Southeast Asia. And its cells will be used to power over 150,000 electric vehicles per year. Just to give you an idea, President Jokowi wants Indonesia to manufacture over 600,000 EV vehicles by the year 2020. And another initiative that the government introduced last year is that it announced that car manufacturers that agreed to build their own facilities in the country will be allowed to import fully built up or completely knocked down EVs without having to pay import duties or luxury good taxes until the end of 2025. Now, this is very interesting because it is an incentive for foreign companies to come in, but at the same time, it's only till 2025, which, we'll have to see whether the policy continues. And Indonesia is characterized by flip-flopping of policies. So yeah, the focus on electric vehicles is because of the resources and just the comparative advantages Indonesia has compared to other countries in terms of labor, resources, lower costs. And this is what's driving the growth in the EV industry at the moment. I hope that answers your question, Jeshil.
It does, Uday. And it's a very interesting point that you brought up about the comparative advantage because, as you mentioned, Indonesia checks a lot of boxes. And if I'm right, even Tesla was interested in investing in Indonesia. So that is a very interesting part. But
Yeah.
however, looking at the flip side of things, Raga, what do you think are a few areas where you feel like the government is lacking right now?
Or just to expand that, Raga, what do you feel are the challenges for, Indonesia becoming the EV hub of Southeast Asia?
So certainly I will be talking about the challenges to the EV sector as well. But before that, Uday, I'll just answer your first question, which is what is downstreaming all about? Now, Jokowi had an idea, some would call it a masterstroke, around in 2020, where he thought of nickel downstreaming. Indonesia, like you said, has a treasure trove of nickel, and it is a mineral that is crucial for EV batteries and stainless steel. So the idea was to create from start to end production, all done in Indonesia, which would bring all the jobs to Indonesia. It would bring in all the assembly level to the manufacturing level processes within Indonesia and develop its own economy domestically. Now, when we're talking about EV, there are a lot of challenges that Indonesia does face. For example, Indonesia has stiff competition from the EV manufacturing hubs, which are already established in China, Thailand, and Vietnam. Now, Thailand is known as the Detroit of Southeast Asia, for all purposes in terms of auto manufacturing. They already have an ecosystem which is of significant scale. So it is very difficult to compete with these markets we're talking about. So while Indonesia possesses abundant raw materials, which includes nickel for EV batteries, it does lack the infrastructure, it lacks the skilled workforce and the cost competitiveness of its regional counterparts. Thailand, for instance, boasts currently of the highest demand for EVs in the region at 58.3%, which is pretty hard to beat. The other aspect is that Indonesia has some quality issues. For example, meeting the international quality standards is part of the process of establishing this EV industry. And robust manufacturing processes and stringent quality control measures are essential to build trust with international buyers, as well as upholding fair labor practices and ensuring that worker safety are followed. However, in Indonesia's industrial plants, there have been many occupational accidents that have taken place. Even as recently as a few weeks ago, we saw about 19 people being killed in an accident in a nickel smelter plant. It was a Chinese-owned plant, and they are notoriously known for safety issues, of course. Another challenge that Indonesia faces is the gap in technology, the gap in skills, and the significant investment that it needs for the EV sector. So there are efforts that are ongoing to integrate nickel production into the US supply chain. But because of these shortcomings that I just mentioned, there have also been obstacles. The other aspect is that the rapid growth of the EV industry in Indonesia comes at a huge cost to the environment because there is degradation and exploitation that is involved. So Western business partners and especially environmentally conscious organizations are pretty wary of these sort of issues, which can potentially affect them. And they will likely exert pressure on the Indonesian government to adopt more sustainable business models over the medium to long term. So these are some of the challenges there in terms of the EV sector in Indonesia.
Great. That's very interesting, Raga. You mentioned over the medium term and long term, especially in context of Western companies. How much would you say is the influence of, China already in the EV sector? Because they don't have to necessarily adhere to such regulations. And as you mentioned, there have been various accidents at Chinese-owned nickel plants. There have been violent protests against Chinese management or against Chinese workers also. So that's a pretty strong sentiment in parts of Sulawesi, for example.
Right.
So
Yeah.
how do you think they'll balance this?
So this is quite interesting over there because at this point of time, as we speak, China faces an economic slowdown domestically. And in fact, the Chinese industries, there are manufacturers that are looking at moving their plants to Vietnam and even Indonesia. So investments have been flowing into Indonesia from even the EV sector for a couple of months, years now. So it looks like a ripe market, and especially because China seems to gauge some sort of leeway with these standardized practices, which would be constraining for China. They have managed to gather that leeway within the Indonesian market. So I foresee there will be some investment flows coming in from China too.
Raga, just jumping in a bit here on the investments from China. We have
Right.
also seen the government offer a lot of subsidies to Chinese companies. For example, recently BYD, which is a Chinese company which overtook Tesla to become the largest EV manufacturer in the world, they are planning to enter the Indonesian market. In scenarios like this, do you feel like it would create an environment where Chinese companies are going to undermine Indonesia's own businesses? Is there a possibility of that happening?
Yes, Jeshil, like you did mention, BYD is one of the companies which has kind of come in a big way. And there is a possibility, certainly, of even undermining the local manufacturers because there is a significant, let's say, influence within certain quarters of the government, which has a more pro-China leaning within Indonesia. So they can somehow surpass some of the limitations they may face, which local manufacturers themselves face in terms of, let's say, capital, gaining capital. Loans to local businesses don't come that easily. If a local manufacturer wants to set up, there are a lot of stringent rules and regulations, and it's not that easy to obtain credit for Indonesian manufacturers. That is not necessarily a problem for the Chinese, So they can come in at a much bigger scale, and that can undermine some of the efforts of the government in terms of encouraging local manufacturers. So that's one of the concerns too. Yes.
Yeah, that's I think very pertinent at this point, considering the elections are going on also, and we have seen a marked rise in anti-Chinese sentiment. For example, late last year there were large-scale protests against the eviction of residents for the Rempang Eco City project, which is apparently funded by China. So these kind of sentiments are, you know, playing underneath. And if we look at the elections themselves, if we have a Prabowo victory, he said that he will likely continue most of Jokowi's policies. So we could see, more of this downstreaming and sometimes policy flip-flopping, which is never a good sign for investors. Prabowo is more nationalistic than Jokowi. So how that would, impact the investment climate remains to be seen, considering it is risky to invest in Indonesia. When it comes to Anis and Ganjar, they've said that they will take into account more of, locals' opposition towards projects, but at the same time, China is investing a lot of money. So whether they'll be able to, completely take China out or limit Chinese influence remains to be seen at this point. So yeah, thanks, Jeshal and Raga. This has been very interesting. Any closing comments from you guys on Indonesia as the rising EV hub of Southeast Asia?
Yes, Sudhir. So in terms of the way forward, Indonesia's nickel ore undergoes seamless processing within the country, and the goal is to refine nickel into the high quality alloys and further process it into batteries without the need for external production facilities. So this ambitious plan that we're seeing can involve hundreds and thousands of workers into high productivity jobs and boost their own economy. However, it is worth noting that competition does exist amongst the Southeast Asian nations in this sector, in the EV sector. So there is a call for cooperation, especially through forums like ASEAN, that would be better rather than the intense competition. And it is pertinent that the government in Jakarta approach this in a multifaceted way through the formation of special economic zones for EV production, or developing the local labor force, and increasing investments into R&D to make sure that there is sustainable growth and competitiveness in the regional market.
I would agree with what Raga said today, and I'd like to just add on to the fact that by cooperating with neighboring countries, I think Indonesia could, like make more profits than how much it's making now, because Thailand, for example, is already well known for manufacturing combustion engines. So as Raga rightly put it, I think they are at a position where they can choose to collaborate rather than compete. And that would be a bold and wise choice moving forward.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jeshul. Thanks a lot, Raga, and for our listeners on joining us today. Appreciate your time, and we'll see you next week.